You've been doing exactly what they told you to do. That's the problem. Not you, not your discipline, not the number on your paycheck. The advice. The advice is wrong, and the people giving it, the finance influencers, the retirement calculators, the parents who survived a completely different economy and thought they were handing you a map. They're not lying. They believe it. That's what makes it almost impossible to see clearly. When the thing failing you looks exactly like responsibility, you don't question it. You double down. Save more, cut more, say no to more things. You stay exactly where you are and wonder what you're missing. I'm going to tell you what you're missing. Not in theory, in rules, specific ones, numbers attached. But first, someone you need to know. There's a man who understood money at a level most people alive today still haven't reached. No financial advisor, no hedge fund. What he wrote in 1532 explains your bank account better than anything published in the last 50 years. Niccolò Machiavelli. He wasn't writing about money, he was writing about power. But money is power's most portable form, and every principle he laid out about how rulers gain and lose control maps almost perfectly onto how individuals gain and lose wealth. In chapter 25 of The Prince, he describes fortune as a river. Calm water, men have time to build dikes, channels, redirects. When the flood comes, the men who built nothing get swept away, sometimes drowned. The men who prepared survive, occasionally profit from the chaos. What Machiavelli saw, and what the personal finance industry will not say out loud because their business model depends on you not knowing it, is that defensive money strategy is a losing strategy. Has always been. The game isn't won by protecting what you have. It's won by sending what you have somewhere it multiplies. A savings account is a bucket held up to a flood. So, 8 rules. By the end, you'll have a framework the advice industry profits from you never having. Let's go. Rule 1. Saving rewards discipline and punishes ambition. Here's what saving actually does. It takes a cut of your income, moves it somewhere slightly less accessible, and lets it grow at a rate that roughly matches inflation on a good year. It is a patience reward system. That's it. It rewards patience. It cannot reward ambition because ambition requires deployment, and saving, by definition, is the refusal to deploy. $500 a month in a high-yield savings account at 4.5%. 10 years, you have around $75,000. That's real. That's not nothing. It will not change your life. The wealthy person does something different from the start. They calculate the minimum required for genuine security. 3 to 6 months of actual expenses. Liquid, untouched, boring. Everything above that number gets deployed into index funds, a business, a skill that raises what the market pays them. Something with a return attached. $500 a month into a diversified index at historical 10% average. 10 years, around $102,000. Better. The gap between those two numbers gets ugly at year 20. But here's the uncomfortable part. Neither of those numbers fundamentally changes your life either. The person who took $300 of that $500 and put it into a skill, a course, a certification, one capability the market actually pays for, and raised their income $15,000 a year as a result, 3 years in, that's $45,000 in additional income, on top of the investment account, on top of everything else. That's the number with a different kind of math behind it. Machiavelli wrote about the prince who consolidates endlessly and never expands, secures the current territory with such focus that movement becomes impossible. He called it failure in disguise. Stagnation dressed as virtue is still stagnation. You can be disciplined and broke simultaneously. A lot of people are. Most of them feel responsible about it. Saving is a floor, not a ceiling, a starting position, not a destination. Most people build their entire financial life on the floor and call it a house. Rule 2. Saving trains a scarcity brain. A scarcity brain loses every negotiation it enters. This one is less about math, more about what chronic under-resourcing does to the way a person thinks and decides and moves through professional situations where money is on the table. When you've been optimizing for minimum spend long enough, it rewires the question you ask about every transaction. You stop asking what something generates. You start asking if you can afford it. Those questions sound similar. They are not similar. They don't produce the same answers. They don't build the same life. Two people negotiate the same job offer. First person has $800 in checking, no other options, needs this job this week. They take the first number on the table, maybe 1 week pushback. Then they fold, because the alternative is nothing, and they can't afford nothing. The person across the table felt that. They always feel that. Second person has a funded emergency account and 2 other conversations happening. They ask for $15,000 more. They get $12,000 because they can walk. The person across the table felt that too. That $12,000 isn't just $12,000. It anchors every future raise calculation at that company. It sets the floor for their next negotiation at the next company. It affects bonus percentages, 401k match, everything downstream. One conversation that went differently because one person was negotiating from strength and one person was negotiating from a burning platform. Machiavelli was exact about this. The prince who rules from fear of loss makes weak decisions, not occasionally, as a pattern, because every option gets filtered through what might be lost instead of what might be gained. The options that survive that filter are always the smallest available. Scarcity thinking isn't a character flaw. It's a trained response to a specific financial condition. You don't fix it with a mindset podcast. You fix it by building enough foundation that you're no longer choosing between bad options under pressure. That foundation costs money to build before you feel ready to spend it. That's not a contradiction. That's the mechanism. Rule 3. The money you don't spend on yourself is the most expensive money you own. Read that again. The money you don't spend on yourself is the most expensive money you own, because it isn't sitting still. Every dollar you didn't spend on a skill that would have raised your income, that dollar has a price. The gap between what you earn now and what you would have earned, that gap is real money, invisible because you never spent it, so you never saw the return you didn't collect. Machiavelli called it virtù. Not virtue in the moral sense, not goodness. Virtue is the capacity to shape outcomes rather than receive them, to act on the world rather than be acted upon by it. He considered it the most important quality a person could develop. And he was clear, it is built, not inherited, not stumbled into. Every dollar spent building your own capability is a dollar spent buying virtue. The average American spends $1,200 a year on streaming, somewhere close to zero on professional development. One of those purchases entertains them for a few hours. One of those purchases could change their income bracket permanently. They chose entertainment, not from laziness, because no one ever laid out the comparison plainly enough. A course in a high-demand skill, data analysis, financial modeling, copywriting, whatever the market is actually paying for right now, runs $200 to $500. Applied seriously over 18 months, the income shift for most people who actually use it lands between $10,000 and $30,000 per year. The return on a $300 investment, calculated honestly, is somewhere between 3,000% and 10,000%. No index fund does that. The reason people don't make this investment isn't the $300. It's the uncertainty. An index fund has historical returns, documented, trustworthy. A skill investment returns based on whether you actually apply it, which depends on you. That uncertainty makes it feel riskier. It isn't riskier, it is less passive. The broke person needs certainty. Small, guaranteed gains. The wealthy person tolerates uncertainty in exchange for the possibility of something asymmetric. That tolerance is itself a skill. You build it the same way you build any skill, by doing the thing repeatedly until the discomfort becomes manageable. Rule 4. Access is purchased, and it compounds faster than any index fund. There's a spending category the wealthy return to consistently, almost without exception, that the broke avoid almost completely. Not luxury goods, not status symbols, proximity. They spend money to be in rooms with people operating at a level above where they currently sit. Conferences, masterminds, high-level communities, mentorship relationships that cost something real. The broke person sees a $2,000 conference and does the math. $2,000 spent. The wealthy person sees a room full of people who have already solved the problems currently costing them months of unnecessary trial and error. One weekend of real conversations worth more than most courses they could buy. One conversation at the right conference changes a career trajectory. One introduction leads to a contract. One person who sees something in you before you fully articulated it yourself and has the network to act on it is worth more than most financial instruments you will ever hold. Machiavelli on this was blunt. The prince who isolates himself to conserve resources dies alone when the siege comes. Strategic alliance building isn't socializing, it's force multiplication. No allies means no leverage. No leverage means you negotiate from weakness every single time. We already covered what that costs. Purchased proximity doesn't guarantee anything. Nothing does. But it systematically increases the probability of the kind of collision that changes a trajectory. The meeting that shouldn't have happened, the conversation that opened a door, the introduction that became a partnership. The person who never buys access to higher-level rooms is playing a game where those collisions almost never occur by chance. Look at your network right now, the people you have access to, the rooms you can walk into. That is the accumulated result of every spending decision you've ever made, or refused to make, about access. Sit with that. Rule 5. Buying time is the purchase the broke never make. Do this calculation, right now, in your head. Take your annual income, divide by 2,000. That number, that's what 1 hour of your working life is worth to the market. Hold it. Now think about last Saturday. 4 hours doing your own accounting, 3 hours cleaning, 2 hours on admin that's been piling up since the month before. Maybe you did your own taxes, scheduled your own appointments, designed something yourself because hiring a designer felt like an unnecessary expense. If you earn $60,000 a year, your hourly rate is $30. 4 hours of DIY accounting cost you $120 in recoverable time. To avoid paying an accountant $80, you lost $40 net. Felt responsible the entire time. Called it being careful with money. It wasn't careful. It was expensive. Just the kind of expensive that doesn't show up on a bank statement. The wealthy person runs one question against every task in front of them. 1. Does the cost of outsourcing this come in below the value of the time I get back? If yes, and it almost always is, they outsource it. Not with guilt, not with deliberation. They outsource it the way you turn off a light when you leave a room. Automatic, obvious, a virtual assistant at $15 an hour, 10 hours a month of scheduling, inbox management, basic research, $150 total. If those 10 hours get redirected into billable work, client development, one skill you've been meaning to build, the return on that $150 isn't theoretical. It's immediate. It's on the next invoice. Machiavelli wasn't gentle about this. A prince must not exhaust himself on tasks his lieutenants can perform. The prince who insists on doing everything personally is either incapable of trust or unaware of leverage. Machiavelli considered both conditions equally dangerous. Fighting on too many fronts simultaneously, winning none of them completely. You have been fighting on too many fronts, paying yourself in exhaustion, calling it discipline, wearing it like a badge. Those are not the same thing, and you already know it. Your time is the only resource with no replacement mechanism. Money lost can be earned back. Time spent below your hourly rate is gone, permanently, at a loss. Every Saturday you spend doing $30 an hour work to avoid paying someone $15 is a Saturday you traded for negative $15 and called it savings. Start running the actual math on your actual Saturdays. The number will bother you. Good! Let it. Rehook. Stop for a second, because this is where people start to misread what I'm saying. And I'd rather say it plainly than let the misreading stick. This is not a case for spending recklessly. Machiavelli wasn't reckless. Reckless princes died fast, and nobody wrote about them. The ones worth studying were precise, surgical. They knew the difference between bold action and undisciplined action, the way a surgeon knows the difference between a cut and a wound. The difference between the wealthy and the broke is not that one spends freely and one saves carefully. It's that one spends on things that return more than they cost, and one hoards things that return less than inflation takes. That's it. That's the whole distinction. Everything else is noise, and the next three rules are where it gets uncomfortable, because we've covered the obvious categories: skills, access, time. What comes next is the spending your social circle will call unnecessary, excessive, vain, the stuff the broke consensus judges out loud at family dinners and in group chats. That judgment is not accidental. It is a feature of the system. People who have accepted the ceiling tend to enforce it. Stay with me. Rule 6. The appearance investment is not vanity. It is infrastructure. Machiavelli dedicated an entire chapter to this. Chapter 10G Vit. He was not subtle about it. A prince must appear capable, merciful, trustworthy. Appear them, because the appearance is what other people act on immediately. The reality underneath takes time to surface. The appearance works in the first 30 seconds of a room. This is not an argument for deception. It is an argument for understanding perception, which is the actual operating environment of every professional interaction you will ever have. Two consultants. Same skill level, same portfolio, same references. They walk into the same client meeting on the same Tuesday afternoon. One is wearing a $200 suit from a department store rack. Clean, presentable, fine. One is wearing a $900 suit, a watch that doesn't scream but doesn't apologize either. A bag that signals something without announcing it. The client processes those signals before either consultant says a word, before the handshake is finished. The perception of success generates the perception of competence. The perception of competence generates the willingness to pay, and to refer, and to call again. This is not opinion. Sales psychology research has documented it consistently. People in professional contexts assign higher competence to better presented individuals even when objective performance metrics are identical. The better dressed consultant closes more engagements, gets referred more readily, commands higher rates without having to justify them explicitly. You can be angry about it. The market doesn't care. The person who waits until they're earning more to present like they're earning more has the sequence backwards. The presentation is part of what generates the earning, not all of it. A real part. Skipping it to save $700 is like refusing to put a sign outside your business until you have more customers. The broke person defers the appearance investment, waits for income to justify it. Income doesn't come because appearance wasn't there to signal it was safe to send. This isn't about clothes for their own sake. It's about understanding that every professional interaction passes through a perception filter before your actual work gets evaluated. The filter is real. It operates whether you engage with it consciously or not. Engage with it consciously. Find the level of presentation that signals you belong in higher value rooms. Not extravagant, not performative, just correct. Spend what that costs. Then do the work to make the signal true over time. That's the sequence, not the other way around. Rule 7. Your environment is billing you, whether you pay for a better one or not. the apartment you chose to save $400 a month, the neighborhood, the commute you added to justify the cheaper rent, the desk you work from, the coffee shop you use as an office because the home setup never got finished. These are not neutral choices sitting in the background of your life. They are financial decisions with returns that you have probably never calculated. Specific number: moving from a $900 a month apartment in an outer suburb to a $1,300 a month apartment in a central professional neighborhood costs $4,800 more per year. On the surface, a significant increase. Run the full calculation before you stop there. The cheaper apartment comes with a 45-minute commute each way, 90 minutes per day, roughly 390 hours per year assuming 2 weeks off. At $30 an hour, $11,700 in recoverable time value that the cheaper apartment is consuming annually. You paid $4,800 to save $11,700. The more expensive apartment generated a $6,900 annual surplus before accounting for anything else, before accounting for the energy not spent in traffic, before the cognitive load shed when the environment stops working against you, before what happens when you live in proximity to the kind of people and opportunities that cluster in professional density, the neighbor who runs a business, the building where 3 people in your industry happen to live, the coffee shop 2 floors down where you have the conversation that changes something. Machiavelli on Terrain was precise in a way most readers skim past. He was insistent. A prince who chooses his ground chooses his odds. You do not fight on someone else's chosen terrain and expect to win consistently. Environment is terrain. What surrounds you shapes what you're capable of producing in ways subtle enough that most people spend years not identifying them. The broke person optimizes environment for minimum monthly cost. The wealthy person optimizes for maximum output. A workspace that costs $300 more per month but produces $1,000 more in focused, uninterrupted work is not an expense category. It's a leveraged position with a 233% monthly return. Most people have never framed their rent as an investment decision. Start framing it that way, then run the actual numbers for your actual commute, your actual hourly rate, your actual situation. The math will be different than you expect. Not a little different. Almost there. One rule left, the one everything before it was scaffolding for. Every number, every example, every uncomfortable comparison, it was all pointing here, at this specific pattern, this specific cost. The one the advice industry won't name directly because naming it makes their entire model awkward. Machiavelli would start here if he were writing this. I saved it for last because you needed the other 7 rules to hear it correctly. Without them, it sounds like an accusation. With them, it sounds like what it actually is, a diagnosis. Rule 8. The real reason you save is fear. And fear is the most expensive thing you own. Not discipline, not strategy, not long-term thinking or delayed gratification, or any of the other terms the personal finance world uses to make saving feel like character. Fear. Sit with that before you reject it. The rejection is part of the pattern. The person who has been saving from fear has a significant psychological investment in believing they've been saving from wisdom. Those 2 things feel identical from the inside. They produce completely different outcomes on the outside. From the inside, you cannot tell them apart by feeling. You can only tell them apart by looking at what the saving actually does. Here is how you tell them apart. The person saving from strategy has a number, specific, a target with a function attached to it, 3 months of real expenses in a liquid account. They hit the number, they stop adding to it. They redirect everything above it. The account becomes a tool with defined edges. The person saving from fear has a feeling, persistent, vague, a sense that there is never quite enough, that one bad month could unravel everything, that the number needs to be higher, always slightly higher, before they can breathe with any ease. They never hit the target. The target moves every time they approach it. Safety is always one more saved paycheck away. You know which one you are. Machiavelli addressed this in chapter 2 of The Prince. It is his most controversial argument and his most precise one. He wrote that it is better to be feared than loved, but that the worst condition of all is to be governed by your own fear. The prince, making decisions from personal anxiety, makes weak decisions, not occasionally, as a pattern, consistently, because fear is not a neutral lens. It narrows options. It compresses time horizons. It makes the conservative choice feel like the only choice, every time, without exception, until the pattern becomes invisible because it has become normal. Running a financial life from fear produces the same result as running a principality from fear. Slow, defensive, losing ground quietly. Here is the number. The average American has roughly $65,000 saved by age 45, mostly in savings accounts, mostly in low-yield instruments, mostly untouched, because the anxiety that built the account doesn't dissolve when the money appears. It transfers onto the money itself. The pile becomes the anxiety object. Spending it, even strategically, even with a clear return attached, feels like losing something that can never come back. Same person, different decision at 35. They establish a genuine security base, $20,000, high-yield account, 3 months of real expenses, defined, named, closed. Then they take the remaining $45,000 and deploy it. Index funds, a skill investment, a business, some combination. At historical market returns, that $45,000 becomes approximately $116,000 by age 45, without adding another dollar, without changing income, without changing lifestyle, just changing the operating system. The gap between the fear-based approach and the strategic approach, $51,000, over 1 decade, from one decision made differently. That's the floor of what fear costs, the conservative number, before accounting for what happens when capital gets deployed into something with real asymmetric upside. Before accounting for the income that didn't grow because the skill investment never got made. Before accounting for the network that never formed because the conference felt too expensive. $51,000 is just the savings account math. The full cost of the fear operating system runs higher than that. Here is the part that nobody says. The fear isn't irrational. That's the thing. It came from somewhere real. A parent who lost a job and never recovered. A stretch of genuine instability that left a mark. A culture that treats financial failure as a moral verdict and conditions people to avoid it at almost any cost. The fear is a reasonable response to real experiences. But reasonable responses to past conditions are not always correct responses to present opportunities. The fear was calibrated to a version of your life that no longer exists. It runs in the background, filtering every financial decision through a risk model built for a context that's gone. Most options don't survive the filter. You end up with the options that fear allows, which are always the smallest options on the table. You were not built to live inside the options that fear allows. The solution isn't courage as an abstraction. Courage as an abstraction doesn't move money. The solution is structure as a tool, concrete, specific. Build the genuine security base, not the anxiety-driven accumulation that never feels complete, but the calculated, adequately funded, deliberately bounded emergency reserve. 3 months. 6 if your industry is volatile or your income irregular. Set it, name it, close it, stop adding to it. Then look at everything above that number with different eyes. Ask a different question. Not, is this safe? Safe compared to what? Safe compared to 4.5% while inflation runs at 3.2% and the real return is barely positive. Safe compared to the $51,000 you won't have at 45 because it sat in the account doing almost nothing for a decade. Ask instead, what is the most intelligent place I can send this dollar such that it comes back as more than $1? That is the question. The only question that matters at the level above survival. It is what the wealthy ask reflexively. It is what the broke almost never ask, because the fear filter intercepts it before it fully forms. Machiavelli wrote that fortune favors the bold, not the reckless, not the unprepared, not the person who spends without a model or deploys without a foundation. The bold, the person who assessed the terrain, built the capacity, secured the base, and then moved decisively, without waiting for conditions that will never be perfect. Everything in this video was the preparation for that movement. The security base is the dike. Everything above it is the deployment. That is the structure. That is the entire thing reduced to 2 sentences. You have been building dikes and calling it a financial plan. Close here is what I want you to carry out of this. Saving is not a virtue. Saving is a default. What happens when no one gave you a better model? When the only financial instruction you ever received was spend less than you earn, and nobody followed that up with, and then do something intelligent with the difference. The wealthy don't save more than you. In most cases, they save less, as a percentage of income. What they do differently is deploy more. Every dollar above the security base has a job, not a home, a job. It gets sent somewhere, it returns to. That's the entire difference. Distilled, most of the financial advice you've received was written for a world where you kept the same job for 40 years and retired on a pension someone else funded. That world is gone. The advice didn't leave with it. Machiavelli watched governments rise and collapse, watched men with every advantage lose everything because they played defense when the moment required offense, watched men with nothing, no inheritance, no favorable birth, no natural allies, build principalities because they understood one thing clearly: fortune rewards the prepared and the willing. Not the cautious, not the static, not the man who waited for conditions to feel right before he moved. He was writing for people who wanted to win in a world not designed to help them win. That is exactly where you are. The system you are operating inside is not neutral. The savings account pays you 4.5% and lends your money out at 24%. The financial advisor charges 1% of assets under management annually, which sounds like almost nothing until you calculate that 1% on a $500,000 portfolio over 20 years is over $185,000 in fees compounding against your balance. The system is structured to capture the value of your discipline and return you a fraction of it. The exit from that structure is not rebellion. It is knowledge, slow, deliberate. The specific knowledge the system profits from you not having. Rules like these, applied consistently, over time, not perfectly, consistently. That is it. That is the whole thing. The broke save what's left. The wealthy deploy what they have. One of those sentences describes the person you've been. Decide which one describes what you do next. There's a rule in this video most people will hear and walk away from. Not because they disagreed with it, because agreeing with it requires admitting the old approach was wrong, and that is genuinely uncomfortable. More uncomfortable than most people will sit with voluntarily. So they'll nod, close the tab, open something easier. A few won't. A few will pull out a notebook or open a notes app, whatever, and write down their actual hourly rate. Will look at what's sitting above their security base right now and ask the question they've been filtering out. Will make one different decision this week. Just one. Those people are not smarter, not more talented, not better positioned. They're just willing to be uncomfortable for long enough to move. Most people will scroll past. A few won't. Decide which one you are.